The wind howled like a wounded beast as Ethan Cole spurred his horse up the ridge, eyes wide with horror. Snow fell in blinding sheets over Redemption Valley, but the fire beneath the winter sky burned hotter than hell itself. Below him, his family's ranch, once proud and strong, was nothing but a roaring sea of flames. Sparks flew like angry stars, devouring the old barn and the wooden porch where his mother used to hum old hymns. He could hear the faint, ragged cry of someone trapped inside. His breath caught. The smell of smoke clawed at his throat. "Mother!" he shouted, leaping from his horse into the inferno, not caring whether salvation or damnation waited on the other side. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The storm had come without mercy. The wind whipped snow and cinders together, turning the valley into a nightmare of ash and ice. Ethan's boots sank into the burning mud as he stumbled toward the collapsing doorway. His mind raced. How could this have happened? The Cole Ranch had stood for 30 years, weathering droughts, floods, and harsh winters. But not this, not fire, in the dead of winter. He forced his way through the smoke, shouting for his father, his mother. The heat seared his face. Tears streamed down, half from pain, half from panic. But before he could reach the parlor, the roof groaned above him. A beam fell, slamming into the ground just inches from where he stood. The impact threw him backward into the snow outside. And then, a shadow appeared through the smoke. A woman, wrapped in a soot-stained shawl, dragging his father by the shoulders. Behind her, his mother's frail figure clung to her skirt. Ethan blinked, disbelief and relief flooding his chest. The woman's voice broke through the roar of fire. "Help me get them away from the flames!" He didn't hesitate. Together, they pulled his parents toward the frozen creek, collapsing in exhaustion as the roof finally gave way, sending a burst of sparks into the black sky. Ethan turned to thank her, but before he could speak, she was gone. Only the imprint of her boots in the snow remained, leading toward the small cottage beyond the ridge. Hours later, as dawn broke over the valley, Ethan knelt beside his mother's bed inside that very cottage. The fire still smoldered in the distance, but here the air was warm with the faint smell of herbs and candle wax. The woman, Mary Dawson, moved quietly around the room, wrapping his mother's hands in linen and pressing a damp cloth to his father's forehead. Ethan had seen many kinds of strength in his life. The brute strength of men on horseback, the cunning of businessmen in Denver. But this was different. There was no fear in her eyes, only calm determination. "Who told you to risk your life for them?" he asked, his voice still hoarse from the smoke. She didn't look at him. "No one needs to tell me to do what's right." Ethan swallowed hard. "You could have died." "So could they," she said, wringing the cloth and setting it back down. "I was closer to the flames, that's all." For the first time in years, Ethan didn't have an answer. He was a man of wealth and reputation, yet in front of this widow with ash on her face and compassion in her voice, he felt small. Outside, the valley was waking. A few townsfolk gathered near the ruins of the ranch. Whispering and pointing toward the ridge, word had already spread. The prodigal cowboy has returned. Sheriff Clay Rourke rode up the path, his badge dull under the pale sun. He removed his hat when he saw Ethan. "Heard you came back just in time to watch your own house burn." Ethan ignored the sting in his tone. "Any idea what caused it?" The sheriff spat into the snow. "Could be an accident. Could be someone wanted you gone for good. Either way, we'll find out." His gaze flicked toward Mary's cottage. You staying here? Ethan hesitated. For now. Rourke gave a slow nod. Careful, Cole. Folks around here like their stories simple. A rich man sharing a roof with a widow don't fit that picture. Ethan's jaw tightened. Let them talk. The sheriff smiled faintly. They will. And with that, he turned his horse and rode away. As night fell again, Ethan stood outside the cottage staring at the blackened remains of his family's ranch. The cold bit deep, but he barely felt it. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the memory of the fire and of the woman who'd faced it without fear behind him. Mary stepped out, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. She handed him one. They'll need rest for days, she said softly, glancing toward the sleeping forms of his parents through the window. I owe you more than I can ever pay, he said. She took a sip, then gave him a look sharp enough to cut through the night. Don't insult me with that. Decency isn't something you pay for, Mr. Cole. He blinked. Then why help us? Her eyes softened, just a little. Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. She turned back toward the door. Good night. Ethan watched her go, the door closing gently behind her. He stood there a long time until the fire's last embers faded into the snow. That night, as the valley lay silent beneath the stars, Ethan knew 2 things for certain. First, someone had set that fire on purpose, and second, whether he meant to or not, he was bound to that widow by something deeper than gratitude. Somewhere beyond the hills, the faint glow of lanterns flickered, a sign that Redemption Valley was watching and it never forgot. Dawn bled pale and thin across Redemption Valley, washing the black husk of the Cole Ranch in a colorless light. Smoke still ghosted from the ruins, twisting up into the brittle morning like an unfinished prayer. Inside Mary Dawson's cottage, the smell of boiled oats and spruce pitch replaced the stench of burned timber. Ethan woke on a chair he'd dragged beside his mother's pallet, a blanket falling from his shoulders. His neck ached. His eyes were grainy from too little sleep, but the steady rise and fall of Grace Cole's breathing steadied him. Across the room, Thomas Cole slept more fitfully, his hands clenched, a man still wrestling with flames in his dreams. Mary moved quietly, the way someone moves when silence is part of the medicine. She arranged bandages on the table, clean cloths, a jar of bear grease, a spool of thread for mending a torn coat later. The cottage had the neatness of necessity. Little Sam, barefoot and tousled, stood by the door with a strip of jerky in his hand, his solemn eyes considering Ethan as if he were a story told by a stranger. Morning, Ethan said softly. Sam nodded, chewing. She says you can have the bigger cup. He pointed at the tin mugs by the stove. On account of how smoke took your voice. Ethan touched his throat. It did sting when he swallowed. That's kind of her. Mary looked up, neither warm nor cold. It's practical. I need you upright, not wheezing on the floor. He almost smiled, then thought better of it. Thank you. Check your mother's bandage, Mary said. We'll change it after the porridge. She turned to Sam. Find wood, please. Small pieces dry. Sam slipped out the door without question, and the morning air folded itself behind him. Ethan brushed a strand of white hair back from his mother's brow. Grace stirred, her eyes fluttering open, the blue of them faded but stubborn. You came, she whispered. I came, he said. His throat thickened from something older than smoke. Her fingers found his, paper thin and warm. Your father still fights everything in his sleep. I saw. He looked toward the other pallet. He'll wake to find himself under a roof he doesn't own. She managed a hint of mischief, or perhaps memory. He never owned the sky either, though he argued with it plenty. Then fragile seriousness. Be kind to the woman who saved us. I intend to be. Mary set a bowl near Grace, blew on the steam, and motioned for Ethan to help lift her. Grace ate slowly, gratefully. Thomas woke with a start, pushing himself up on one elbow, then wincing when his shoulder barked. He glanced around, disoriented, took in the cottage, the neatness, Mary's calm face, Ethan's presence. Something closed over his expression like a shade. He took the bowl Mary offered and ate without a word, each spoonful a stubborn truce with need. When they had finished, Mary straightened. I need to fetch willow bark from the river bend. It will help with the pain. Mr. Cole, she said, meaning the older one, don't tell me you feel fine. No one feels fine after breathing a house fire. Thomas's mouth twitched, but he said nothing. Ethan stood. I'll go with you. Mary tied a scarf at her throat. You'll check your father's wounds after we return. That wasn't a request? Ethan said, half to learn her edges. It was grammar, she answered, and stepped into the day. They walked down the slope toward the creek, both crunching frost, both quiet. The sky was a hard, brittle blue, the kind winter wears after it's decided the worst isn't over. Smoke from the ranch smudged the horizon. Crows had found the fence posts and were discussing fate in harsh syllables. You have enemies, Mary said, not looking at him. I can smell it on a fire the way I smell kerosene on a man's coat. This wasn't a spark from a kitchen stove. Ethan's jaw worked. You're sure? I've been sure before, she said evenly. Once in a field hospital with 50 men coughing red. Once behind a church when a man said he didn't hit his wife hard. Fire and lies share a scent. I thought it, he admitted. Thinking is easier than proving. Then don't confuse the two, she said. Prove it. They reached the river bend, its skin of ice glimmering like dull glass. Mary selected a stand of willow, showing Ethan how the green bark peeled thin as a ribbon. She placed the strips in a pouch. You'll need to go into town, she said. Folks will come to you if you don't go to them, and it's worse that way. Worse how? They'll tell their story first, she said. If you tell yours second, you'll be the villain or the fool. Which am I? Depends on the day, she said. Then, a softness he did not expect. Today you're a son. They returned to the cottage. Ethan checked the bandages as he'd been told. Mary watched, corrected the angle of his hand, nodded once when he did it right. Thomas grunted, tolerated Grace, whispered a prayer. The house warmed to human breath and simple survival. By late morning, Sheriff Clay Rourke reined in at the yard. He dismounted slow, as if decency itself weighed between one boot and the other. He removed his hat before he knocked. Mary opened the door and did not invite him in. Ma'am, he said. Ethan. Sheriff, Ethan replied. Rourke's gaze slid toward the pallets, toward the stillness of convalescence, toward the neatness no man maintains alone. Pastor Jeremiah is whispering up the hill, he said without preface. Whispers travel downhill faster than horses. And what's he whispering? Mary asked. That a widow and a rich man make poor neighbors under the same roof. The sheriff shifted, discomforted. He's calling a meeting at the chapel at sundown. Mary's eyes sharpened. To count my spoons. To count his congregation, Rourke said, dry. There's a difference if you're the one passing the plate. Ethan's hands balled at his sides. Let him call. I'll speak. Rourke studied him. Careful, he said. Jeremiah likes sinners he can catalog and save in neat rows. He finds less use for those who don't kneel on cue. If he's the shepherd, he can stand a stray or two, Mary said. Rourke inclined his head toward her. I don't disagree, but my job is not to argue theology. It's to keep your steps from turning into stones. He replaced his hat. There's more. Walter Briggs rode out at daybreak to examine the ruins. Said he was looking for cause. The sheriff's eyes hardened. Walter's a banker. When he says cause, he means leverage. Ethan felt the cold take a tighter grip. He'll get neither here. Rourke's mouth twitched. Then you'll forgive me for watching him anyway. He nodded at Mary, ma'am. He swung into the saddle and left them a gust of stirred snow and a sense that a day, once quiet, had chosen sides. Briggs, Mary said. Not as a question, Ethan's temper flared like a blow becoming a bruise. We did business a long time, he said. He knows where numbers sleep. He thinks that makes him master of their dreams. Numbers don't dream, Mary said. People do. He exhaled. I should go into town now. You should, Mary said. Take Sam with you. Ethan blinked. Why? Because men speak less poison around a child, she said. Because Sam can fetch Dr. Ellis if your father worsens. Because he'll see you nod to people who think they've already judged you. She went to the door, Sam. The boy came in from splitting kindling, cheeks red, pride in his posture. Yes, ma'am? Put on your boots. You're riding with Mr. Cole to town. Sam's eyes lit on the gray horse. On the gray horse, Ethan said. They rode out under a winter sun thin as a nailhead. The road into redemption was rutted and stubborn. Houses trailed smoke. Dogs watched without barking. Women stood on porches and pretended they had stepped out for air. At the general store, a bell announced them the way a rumor announces itself. Bright, inevitable. Ethan bought coffee, flour, a sack of oats, a bolt of coarse cloth. He made a point to greet each person he knew by name. Ben, who mended harness. Luann, who ran the post. Mr. Dill, who pretended his hearing faltered when the talk went unkind. Sam stood beside him like a new squire to an old knight, solemn and proud. Lena Briggs entered on a gust that smelled faintly of lilac and money. She removed her gloves slowly, the way some people draw a knife slowly, because the point isn't to cut, but to promise cutting. Her hair was pinned in a style that made Ethan think of the city, of evenings that had once required him to polish himself into something shinier than virtue. Ethan Cole, she said coolly. Look what the wind carried back. He inclined his head. Lena, I heard your place burned. Her voice carried the sympathy of a banknote. Flawless paper, no blood. Terrible thing. Father says he'll do everything he can. Everything he can, Ethan repeated, knowing too well how elastic those words were in Walter Briggs's hands. She eyed Sam, then Ethan's bundle of practical goods. Trading guilt for oatmeal, are we? That's very plain of you. We're mending people, Ethan said. Plain is good for that. She smiled without warmth. Father says the valley needs progress, a little consolidation. He says fires make people reasonable. Fires make people desperate, Ethan said. That's not the same as reasonable. Semantics, she said lightly. Walter says there will be a gathering at the chapel tonight. Pastor Jeremiah knows how to lay out a case. She leaned closer, her perfume a whisper from a life he had outgrown. You never did like crowds unless they were clapping. Be careful. These don't clap. Sam's hand found Ethan's sleeve. Ethan nodded, to Lena, to the storekeeper, to the world that kept testing him, Tell your father I prefer meetings where no one pretends God is voting. Lena's eyes sharpened. Then choose your allies well. She slid her gloves back on, each finger a decision snapped into place. Good luck, Ethan. He watched her go, then knelt to Sam's level. If anyone asks about Mary, you say what is true. Sam's gaze was steady. That she makes soup better than anyone, and that she pulled Mr. Cole out of the fire by his collar? That she did right, Ethan said. Every time it hurt. They rode back at a slower pace, the valley stretching out like a ledger waiting for numbers honest enough to balance it. When the cottage came into view, smoke rose from the chimney like a promise kept. Grace had propped herself against pillows. Thomas stared out the window, his jaw clenched. But he nodded when Ethan entered, which for Thomas was almost a blessing. Ethan set the supplies down. Mary met his eyes, reading the town in them, the way she read fever in a man's skin. Well, she said. Pastor at sundown, he answered. Briggs in the ashes, Lena in silk. And Sheriff? Watching, Ethan said. Mary tied an apron around her waist, the action an oath as old as hunger. Then we'll do what folks do before a storm, she said. We'll make dinner, and we'll tell the truth, slow enough to be heard. As evening drew its long indigo veil, candles were lit across the valley like a constellation worried into being. Boots began to scuff the chapel steps on the hill. The bell sounded once, a thin, eager note. Inside the cottage, Mary tucked a blanket around Grace, straightened Thomas's collar, and handed Ethan a scarf. Words can burn too, she said. Don't mistake heat for light. He nodded, feeling the scarf like armor. Outside, little Sam stood in the doorway, chin lifted, as if he could hold back night with posture alone. Ethan stepped into the cold. The wind tasted of snow and something else. Expectation sharpened to a point. On the hill, the chapel windows glowed, and through them moved shapes that called themselves neighbors. The valley was gathering its story, and in the hush before the telling, it decided who must stand up to speak. The chapel on the hill had never seen so many boots lined at its door. The bell tolled once, then twice, echoing through the valley as the evening wind carried the sound across the darkening fields. Inside, lanterns burned low, the air thick with wood smoke and judgment. Ethan Cole stepped through the doorway beside Mary Dawson, with little Sam trailing behind, his hat clutched nervously to his chest. The murmurs stilled like a flame smothered beneath a glass. Pastor Jeremiah stood at the pulpit, a tall man with narrow shoulders and a gaze like a knife dulled by repetition. Neighbors, he began, his voice solemn and heavy. We gather tonight in sorrow for the fire that took the Cole homestead, and in concern for what may have come after. Ethan felt every eye turn to him, suspicion, pity, and curiosity tangled in their stares. Mary's expression remained steady, though her hands tightened on the folds of her shawl. She whispered, "Don't rise to their bait," before moving toward a back pew. But Ethan stayed near the front, refusing to shrink from what was coming. Jeremiah cleared his throat. Some of you may have heard troubling talk that our widow neighbor, Mrs. Dawson, has taken in the Cole family, that a man, not her kin, shares her roof. He paused just long enough for the crowd to ripple with disapproval. It's not my place to condemn, only to remind that propriety keeps the valley decent. A murmur broke loose. Decent, yes. Shame. A widow should know better. Ethan's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his boots sounding against the floorboards. If decency means leaving two old folks to freeze, then I'll choose indecency every time. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Jeremiah raised a hand for silence. Mr. Cole, he said, your grief makes you rash, but grief cannot excuse sin. And what sin would that be? Ethan's voice was steady but sharp. That my parents breathed because she dragged them out of the fire? That a woman gave more kindness in one night than I have seen in half this town in years? The pastor's lips thinned. Words do not change appearances. Mary rose from the pew. Her voice was clear, cutting through the whispers. Appearances, she said, don't feed the hungry or keep the sick alive. If you want to talk about virtue, Pastor, come measure it by calluses, not gossip. A shocked silence followed. Thomas and Grace Cole, both pale and weak, sat near the door. Even they seemed stunned by the widow's audacity. Then a woman near the aisle stood, Mrs. O'Neill, the seamstress, and murmured, "She saved them. That's true." Another voice joined. "My brother owes her his arm from the war." Slowly, the mood shifted, doubt fighting with prejudice, but not everyone was swayed. From the side pew, Walter Briggs rose, his silver-tipped cane tapping the floor. He smiled politely, the kind of smile that never touched his eyes. "No one questions the lady's courage," he said smoothly. "But it is curious, isn't it? Fires and fortunes seem to follow the coals. One burns down, another rises. A coincidence or providence?" Ethan turned toward him, recognizing the tone, honey laced with venom. "You've had your eye on our land for years, Briggs. You'd call anything providence if it left a deed in your pocket." Walter lifted a brow. "Careful, Mr. Cole. Anger burns as quickly as timber. Perhaps your house caught it from you." Before Ethan could answer, Sheriff Rourke's voice cut through. "Enough." He stepped from the back, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "This isn't a trial. If we're looking for cause, we'll find it in daylight, not under this roof." Jeremiah frowned but relented. "Then let us pray for truth." He bowed his head, and the congregation followed. But Ethan stood motionless, his eyes on Briggs. In that moment, he understood something. The fire wasn't chance. It was a warning, and its sender stood right before him. When the service ended, people drifted out in small knots of whispers. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow, muffling the sound of their boots. Outside, Mary pulled her shawl close, her breath misting in the cold. "You shouldn't have spoken that way," she said. Ethan met her gaze. "You mean I shouldn't have told the truth?" "I mean you shouldn't have told it where lies echo louder." She turned away, her tone weary rather than angry. "Words are tinder here, Mr. Cole. Use them wrong, and you'll start another fire." He watched her walk down the hill, Sam skipping behind her, and for the first time, he felt the valley closing around him. Not as home, but as something that needed taming. At the foot of the chapel steps, Sheriff Rourke waited. He lit a cigarette, shielding the flame from the wind. "You made yourself a fine target tonight," he said. "I was one before I spoke," Ethan replied. Rourke nodded, exhaling smoke that curled like a thought unfinished. "You're right about Briggs. He's been buying up deeds, forcing hands. But he's smart, never leaves a mark that points back to him." "You think he lit the fire?" "I think he owns men who don't ask why they carry oil," Rourke said quietly. "I'll need proof before I act, and you'll need patience." Patience. The word tasted like rust on Ethan's tongue. "That's not my best virtue." The sheriff smiled thinly, "Then learn it fast. Because next time you talk back in that chapel, Jeremiah might hand you a rope instead of forgiveness." Ethan looked toward the town below, its lanterns flickering like tired eyes. Let him try. When he returned to the cottage, The night was nearly black. Grace was asleep. Thomas sat by the window, staring at the ashes of the old house across the field. The moonlight made his features look carved from stone. "You made noise," he said without turning. "They called her a sinner," Ethan said. "I wasn't staying quiet for that." Thomas's hand tightened on the armrest. "You think shouting in a chapel changes what people are?" "No," Ethan admitted. "But maybe it reminds them what they could be." His father's shoulders sagged, not with defeat, but with age. "You talk like your mother." "That's not an insult," Ethan said softly. Thomas gave a grunt that might have been agreement. "Just don't get that woman hurt." "I won't." "See that you don't, because she's braver than you, and braver folk die first." The words sank deep. Ethan said nothing. Outside, the snow thickened, swallowing the valley in a silence so pure it almost hurt. He stood there for a long time, watching the cottage's single light flicker in the wind. By morning, Redemption Valley would wake again, and tongues would wag louder than church bells. But something in Ethan had shifted. The fire hadn't ended with the ranch. It had only changed form, spreading through whispers and debts, through men like Briggs who smiled while they poisoned. And somewhere beneath all that smoke lay a truth waiting to be dragged into the open. He looked toward Mary's small room, where a faint light glowed behind the curtain. The woman had saved his parents, his home, and maybe, in some way, his soul. Now it was his turn to save something. Her name, their valley, perhaps even himself. Outside, the snow whispered against the window, as if the land itself was listening. The next battle would not come with flames, but with words, and he could already feel the first spark waiting in his throat. Tomorrow, he would ride to town again, and this time, he wouldn't go as a man defending guilt, but as one demanding truth. The morning after the chapel's storm of whispers dawned cold and sharp, the sky over Redemption Valley glinting like broken glass. Frost clung to the fences and the burnt skeleton of the coal ranch, shimmering faintly as the sun climbed over the distant ridges. Ethan saddled his horse before the mist had fully lifted. He had not slept. The smell of smoke still lived in his hair and clothes, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the orange light swallowing his family's porch. Mary came out to the porch of her cottage, a wool shawl drawn tight over her shoulders. Little Sam was still asleep inside, curled up beside the dying embers of the hearth. "You're leaving early," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, tightening the strap on his saddle. "I'm going to town. I need to talk to the sheriff, find out if he's learned anything." Her eyes searched his face, "Or if you'll find something to feed your anger." He looked away. "If I don't, it'll eat me alive." Mary sighed, stepping down from the porch. "I can't stop you, but I'll ask you this once. Don't become what they already think you are." He gave her a tired smile. "A man with nothing left to lose?" "No," she said softly. "A man who burns everything, trying to prove he didn't start the fire." Her words stayed with him long after he rode away. The town of Redemption was waking by the time Ethan arrived. Smoke rose from chimneys, mingling with the smell of coffee and horses. The general store door creaked open as he passed, and the chatter of morning gossip spilled into the street. People turned their heads as he rode by. Some nodded politely, others whispered behind gloved hands. The sheriff's office stood near the edge of town, a squat building of red brick and heavy timber. Ethan tied his horse and pushed open the door. Sheriff Rourke sat behind his desk, boot heels up, hat tipped low, a thin wisp of smoke curling from his cigarette. "Morning, Cole," he said without looking up. "Didn't figure I'd see you this soon." "I'm not here to chat," Ethan replied. You find anything? Rourke sighed and set down his cigarette. Depends what you call something. Found boot prints near the barn, small ones. Could be from one of Briggs's men or half the valley. Hard to tell with the snow. Ethan frowned. You said yourself Briggs has men who do his dirty work. I said he might. There's a difference between suspicion and evidence. Ethan leaned on the desk. And how long do we wait while the guilty hide behind both? The sheriff met his eyes, calm as always. As long as it takes to make sure you don't hang for the wrong man's fire. Their stare held for a long moment before Rourke broke it. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, half-burned tin badge. Found this near the barn's remains. Belonged to a ranch hand. Tommy Dean worked for Briggs 2 years back. Left after a fight over wages. You ever cross paths with him? Ethan shook his head. Well, Rourke said, setting the badge down. He's been seen near the South Ridge. If anyone knows something, it's him. I'll find him, Ethan said. Rourke exhaled heavily. I didn't say that's an invitation. Then take it as a warning, Ethan said, turning for the door. The South Ridge was a long ride through rough country, where the snow gave way to dry red soil and thorny brush. Ethan found Dean's camp by midday. A small fire pit still smoldering, a bedroll half buried under a tarp. The man himself was nowhere in sight. Ethan crouched, scanning the ground. Tracks led down toward the creek. He followed them until he saw movement, a thin man with a rusted revolver slung low on his hip, filling a canteen. Tommy Dean, Ethan called out. The man spun, hand darting for his gun, but stopped when he recognized who stood before him. Cole, he said slowly, squinting. Heard your place burned. That's right, Ethan said, and I heard you might know how. Dean laughed, a dry sound like gravel scraping steel. You think I lit your house? You've got the wrong man. Maybe, but your badge was found in my barn. Dean's smirk faded. That badge don't mean much. Briggs gives 'em to every fool who swings a hammer for him. Ethan took a step closer. You used to swing one, until you stopped. Until he stopped paying me. Dean spat into the dust. You want answers, cowboy? Ask Briggs why he's buying every acre between here and the valley line. Ask him who profits when folks like you pack up and leave. Ethan frowned. And the fire? Dean looked away. All I'll say is this. Someone poured kerosene the night before. I saw the barrels in a wagon near your ranch. Didn't stick around to see who drove it. Names, Ethan pressed. Dean hesitated, eyes darting toward the ridge. There was a man with a scar on his neck. Rides a bay horse. Wears a red scarf. Before Ethan could ask more, a gunshot cracked from the ridge. Dean's body jerked once, then slumped into the dirt. Ethan dove behind a rock, his heart pounding. Another shot rang out, kicking up dust inches from his boot. He spotted a figure on horseback retreating through the brush, the flash of a red scarf whipping in the wind. He fired once, missed, and cursed under his breath. By the time he reached Dean's side, the man was gone. One eye open, glassy, his breath already vanished into the wind. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the snow beginning to fall again, covering the blood like the land itself wanted to forget. But he wouldn't. When Ethan returned to the valley that night, the wind carried the smell of wood smoke from Mary's cottage. She was standing by the gate when he rode up, her lantern flickering in the wind. You're bleeding, she said, rushing to his side. It's not mine. He dismounted slowly, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. A man's dead. Someone killed him before he could tell me who burned the ranch. Mary's eyes widened. You think it was Briggs? I don't think. Ethan said grimly, "I know." She placed a hand on his arm. "Then you need to be careful. He's powerful, and the town believes his word more than yours." "I don't need their belief," he said. "I need proof." Mary hesitated, her voice low. "And when you find it, what then?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression hard but weary. "Then Redemption Valley will see what justice looks like." For a long moment, neither spoke. The snow fell silently, the fire inside the cottage glowing behind frosted windows. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote cried, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo Ethan's own heart. Mary finally whispered, "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "That you'll still be the man who rode into the fire to save others, not the one who walks into the dark to destroy himself." Ethan looked away, the words hitting deeper than he expected. "I'll try," he said, though both of them knew the valley was already steering him towards something darker. As he walked inside, the wind carried a distant sound, the slow, rhythmic creak of a wagon wheel. Out there, beyond the ridge, Briggs was moving his pieces. The game had started, and neither mercy nor law would decide how it ended. The next chapter of Redemption Valley had just begun, and its fire had only started to burn. The dawn broke cold and gray over Redemption Valley, the kind of light that made even the snow seem tired. The world felt heavy, muffled, as if holding its breath. Inside Mary Dawson's cottage, the fire crackled low, and Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee she had poured him. The scent of it filled the room, but he tasted only the bitterness of the night before. The gunshot, the lifeless stare of Tommy Dean, and the red scarf that whipped away into the dark. Mary stood by the window, her shawl wrapped tight, watching the pale horizon. "You haven't slept," she said quietly. "Sleep won't bring the man back," Ethan replied. "It might keep you from following him too soon," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "You can't fight a war when you're falling apart." He rubbed a hand over his face. "This isn't a war. Not yet." Her eyes flicked toward him. "Then what is it?" Ethan didn't answer. Outside, the wind howled through the broken fence posts. His parents were still asleep in the back room, their recovery slow but steady. He looked at the closed door, then back to Mary. "I'm going to the coal ranch," he said. "There's something I need to see for myself." "Ethan," she started, but he was already reaching for his coat. "I won't be long." "You said that yesterday," she said softly. But when he didn't look back, she only whispered to herself, "And every time, you come back more haunted." The ruins of the ranch were a graveyard of ash and silence. The snow had melted around the charred wood, leaving black earth exposed like an open wound. Ethan dismounted and walked slowly through what had once been the barn. Every step crunched against glass and embers. He knelt near the place where Tommy Dean's badge had been found. The ground there was darker, thicker with soot. He scraped at it with his glove and froze. Beneath the layer of ash, a small fragment of glass glinted. He picked it up carefully. It was a lantern shard, the kind used by freight wagons. The edge was slick with something black. Oil, not soot. He lifted it to his nose. Kerosene. Rourke had been right. Someone had planned the fire, and Briggs's men had carried it out. As Ethan turned the shard in his fingers, a rustle came from behind. His hand went to his revolver. "Show yourself." A boy stepped out from behind the ruins of the water trough, barely 16, skinny, with red hands and wide, frightened eyes. "Don't shoot," he squeaked. "Please, mister, I ain't doing nothing." "Then why are you hiding?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but stern. The boy hesitated. Because they said you'd kill anyone who talked to the sheriff. Ethan's brow furrowed. Who said that? Mr. Briggs's men, the boy stammered. They came through last night. Said the sheriff was asking questions. Said anyone who talked'd end up like Tommy Dean. Ethan took a slow step closer. You knew Dean? Worked for him sometimes, the boy said, shivering. He was scared, mister. Said he saw something he shouldn't have. Something about barrels and fire. Ethan's grip tightened on the glass shard. Did he say who was there? The boy swallowed hard. A man with a red scarf. And another, big fella, gray beard, rides a black horse. They called him Boss. Ethan's stomach dropped Briggs himself. Before he could press further, a sound split the cold air. The thunder of hooves. The boy's eyes went wide. They found me, he gasped. Ethan spun, drawing his revolver just as two riders appeared over the ridge. Both wore long coats and scarves, rifles glinting in the morning light. Without a word, they fired. The first shot missed, tearing through the fence. The second whistled past Ethan's ear. He shoved the boy behind the trough and returned fire. One rider fell from his saddle, tumbling into the snow. The other wheeled his horse and galloped away, vanishing into the fog. When the echoes faded, Ethan lowered his gun. The boy peeked out from behind the trough, shaking. You killed him. Ethan's eyes stayed cold. He chose the fight. The boy looked toward the ridge where the fog was closing again. They'll come back. I know, Ethan said, which is why you're going to the sheriff. Tell him what you saw, and tell him Briggs is sending riders. The boy hesitated. What about you? I've got another stop to make. By the time Ethan reached town, the day had darkened. Sheriff Rourke stood outside his office, coat collar turned up against the wind. When he saw Ethan, his expression soured. Tell me you didn't just make more trouble. Ethan dropped the lantern shard on the desk inside proof, he said. Kerosene from a freight wagon, Briggs's kind. Rourke picked it up, turning it between his fingers. Not enough for a warrant, you'll need a witness. There's a boy, worked with Dean. He saw Briggs's men. Rourke's brows lifted. And where is he now? On his way here, Ethan said, if he makes it. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Meaning? Meaning Briggs already sent men after him. I dropped one in the valley. Rourke swore under his breath. Christ, Cole, you're writing your own noose. I'm stopping a murderer, Ethan snapped. Not if you're the one covered in gunpowder when I find the body, Rourke shot back. Let me handle this my way. Ethan stepped closer. Your way gets people killed. The sheriff held his gaze. And yours gets towns burned. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Ethan turned on his heel and left, the door slamming behind him. Rourke sighed, staring at the broken glass in his hand. Outside, the sound of hooves faded into the wind. That night, the storm returned, fierce, howling through the valley. Mary was sitting by the fire when Ethan came in, soaked to the bone. He looked older, harder. She stood, worry etching deep lines into her face. You found something. He nodded. Briggs is behind it. I can prove it soon. She approached him slowly. And what will you do then? End it. Her voice trembled slightly. You mean kill him? Ethan didn't deny it. Ethan, she said, her hand gripping his arm. You can't fight corruption with blood. You'll just become part of the same rot. He met her gaze, his eyes dark. Then tell me what I should do. Wait while he burns down the rest of the valley? Let him destroy everything decent left here? You think vengeance will fix this place? She asked. It'll only bury it deeper. He pulled away. Maybe it's the only thing that'll make them listen. Mary's breath caught. For the first time, fear, not of Briggs but of Ethan, shadowed her eyes. "Don't lose yourself," she whispered. "Not for this valley. Not for me." But Ethan said nothing. He walked to the window and stared out into the storm. The wind howled like a beast beyond the hills, carrying with it the faint echo of hooves and thunder. Somewhere in that darkness, Briggs was moving again, planning his next strike. And Ethan knew, deep down, that the next fire wouldn't just be set with kerosene. It would be set with rage. The valley had turned into a battlefield of quiet wars, and he was already standing in the center of it. Tomorrow he would ride, not for proof, not for law, but for reckoning. The next morning broke with a pale, exhausted sun, one that seemed reluctant to rise over Redemption Valley. The snow had stopped, but a thin fog hung low over the hills, shrouding everything in gray. Ethan stood outside Mary's cottage, tightening the cinch on his horse. His movements were deliberate, silent. The decision he had made during the storm still clung to him like a shadow. Mary came out quietly, her shawl drawn close. She didn't ask where he was going. She already knew. "If you ride out there," she said, her voice low, "you won't find justice, you'll only find more graves." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot from a night without sleep. "If I don't ride, Briggs wins. And everyone he's hurt, Dean, my folks, maybe even you, will mean nothing." Mary's lips trembled, but she stood her ground. "And what happens when you kill him? You think the valley will thank you? They'll call it murder, Ethan. They always do." He mounted the horse, jaw set. "Then they can call it what they want. I'm done letting fear make the rules." Her hand reached out, gripping the edge of his coat. "You're not just fighting Briggs," she whispered. "You're fighting yourself. Don't lose the part of you that still remembers mercy." He hesitated. The fog thickened between them, softening her face like a fading dream. "I'll remember," he said, and rode off before he could change his mind. Briggs's ranch lay across the valley, a sprawl of wealth built from others' ruin, white fences, new barns, and rows of horses that gleamed like polished obsidian. Men in heavy coats patrolled the grounds with rifles slung across their shoulders. It was a fortress disguised as a homestead. Ethan watched from a ridge, his breath fogging the cold air. He had no plan beyond the fire burning in his chest, but fire, he thought, had a way of making its own path. Down below, a wagon rolled into the yard. Two men unloaded barrels near the stable. Barrels marked fuel and oil. His jaw tightened. Proof, right there in the open. Briggs wasn't just guilty. He was bold enough to continue his schemes in daylight. Ethan dismounted and approached on foot, keeping to the fence line until he reached the shadow of a hay barn. Voices drifted through the cold, Briggs's smooth drawl and the deeper rumble of another man. "Double the delivery next week," Briggs was saying. "If the sheriff starts sniffing around, I want every barrel gone before he can blink." The other man, older, with a gray beard and a scar along his cheek, nodded. "And the coal boy? He's stirring trouble." Briggs's tone hardened. "Then maybe he needs reminding of his place. Fire didn't teach him enough." The gray-bearded man chuckled. "We could finish the lesson tonight." Ethan's fingers tightened around his revolver. Every word stoked the fury inside him, but he forced himself to stay still. Not yet. Not like this. Suddenly, a dog barked. One of the guards shouted, "Someone by the fence!" The men turned, rifles raised. Ethan dove behind a wagon, bullets splintering the wood above his head. He rolled, firing once. One guard fell. The others shouted, scattering for cover. He sprinted for the horse pen, jumped the fence, and cut loose two mares. The startled animals bolted, creating chaos. In the confusion, Ethan leapt onto one and kicked hard, galloping out through the open gate. Shots chased him through the valley, whistling past his shoulders, but the fog swallowed him up before they could take aim again. By dusk, he reached the old Miller cabin at the North Ridge, a place long abandoned, its roof sagging and walls riddled with bullet holes from some forgotten feud. He tied his horse under a pine and went inside. The air smelled of dust and rot, but it was shelter. He dropped his gear by the hearth and crouched near the window, watching the valley below. He knew Briggs's men would come. They'd want to silence him before he reached the sheriff, and he'd be ready. As the light faded, he loaded his revolver, each click echoing in the quiet. Outside, the snow began again. Soft, almost peaceful. For a fleeting moment, he thought of Mary, her eyes when she'd said mercy, her trembling hand against his coat, the sound of her voice. Don't lose yourself. But the memory twisted inside him. It's too late, he muttered to the empty room. Then, from outside, the faint crunch of boots on snow. He rose silently, every muscle tight. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. "Ethan," said a familiar voice, Sheriff Rourke. Ethan lowered his gun slightly, exhaling hard. "You shouldn't be here." Rourke closed the door, brushing snow from his hat. "Neither should you. Half the valley saw you ride toward Briggs's place. They think you went to kill him." Ethan's expression darkened. "Maybe I should have." "Then you'd be hanging by morning," Rourke snapped. "You want him dead? Fine. But you'll do it my way. Legal. We've got witnesses, we've got motive, and after today, we've got barrels of evidence thanks to you leading his men on a chase." Ethan frowned. "You followed me?" "I followed the noise," Rourke said dryly. "Briggs's men talk loud when they're scared. I got word they're gathering tonight, planning to torch Dawson's cottage to smoke you out." Ethan froze. "Mary." Rourke nodded grimly. "They think you're hiding there. You ain't, but she'll pay for it all the same." Without another word, Ethan grabbed his gun belt and moved for the door. "Hold up," Rourke said, grabbing his arm. "If you ride straight in, they'll gun you down before you reach the porch." "Then I'll ride faster," Ethan growled. "Cole, listen." The sheriff's voice softened, almost pleading. "You can't save everyone. Not if you're dead." Ethan looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, Rourke's face was weary, lined with years of compromise. "Then help me," he said. "If you ever wanted to make this valley right, help me save her." The sheriff hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "All right, but we do it smart." Ethan's voice was steel. "We don't have time for smart." By the time they reached the ridge overlooking Mary's cottage, the night had deepened into a cruel black. 4 riders circled below, torches in hand. The snow glowed faintly in their light. Inside, Mary's candle flickered through the window. Unaware of the danger approaching, Rourke pulled his rifle from the saddle. "We take the ones on the left," he whispered. "You swing wide and get behind them." Ethan's heart pounded like thunder in his ears. The fire below flashed against his face, painting him in red. "If they touch her," he said quietly, "there won't be enough of them left to bury." He spurred his horse down the hill. The riders turned, shouts rising through the night. Gunfire split the stillness. The sheriff's rifle barked once. Dropping the first torchbearer, Ethan charged through the chaos, bullets hissing past. He fired twice, hitting one man square in the chest. Another turned to flee, but his horse stumbled on the frozen ground, throwing him hard. The last man dropped his torch and ran. Ethan jumped from his horse and caught him by the collar, slamming him against the fence. "Who sent you?" "B. Briggs," the man gasped. "Said to burn her out. Said she was harboring the devil himself." Ethan's grip tightened until the man's face went pale. For a second, he saw only the fire, the red scarf, the endless hate. Then Mary's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't lose yourself." He let go. The man collapsed into the snow, coughing. Rourke came down the path, rifle smoking. "You all right?" he asked. Ethan looked toward the cottage. Mary stood at the doorway, pale but unharmed. Her eyes met his, full of relief and fear. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "For now." But deep in the valley, a new light flared, the glow of many torches moving toward them. Briggs's men weren't finished. The real fight was still coming, and when it did, Redemption Valley would finally burn for the last time. The snow that had fallen the night before still clung to the trees, heavy and silent. Redemption Valley lay under a pale winter sun, but the air was tight with a kind of waiting, a stillness before a storm. Inside Mary's cottage, the scent of smoke and gunpowder still lingered from the night's fight. The ground outside was marked with blood and hoofprints, half buried by the morning frost. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his shirt torn, knuckles scraped raw. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the torches circling Mary's home, the look of terror on her face when the flames caught the fence, the way his finger had almost tightened on the trigger one too many times. Mary moved quietly around the room, setting a kettle on the stove. "You can't stay here," she said softly without looking at him. "I can't leave you either," Ethan replied, his voice rough. "You brought this fight to my door," she said, finally turning to face him. "If you stay, they'll come again. They won't stop until one of you is dead." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Then it'll be him." Mary shook her head. "You don't even hear yourself anymore, do you? You talk like death's already chosen you." He rose from the chair slowly, exhaustion making his movements heavy. "If that's what it takes to stop Briggs, then maybe it has." "Ethan." Her voice softened, pleading now. "You don't have to fight this alone." He looked at her for a long moment, then turned away. "I already am." By midday, Sheriff Rourke rode up the path to the cottage. His horse's hooves broke the crust of ice on the ground, the sound sharp in the stillness. He dismounted and tied the reins to the post, his face grim beneath the brim of his hat. "They're gathering," he said as he stepped inside. "Briggs's men, 30, maybe 40 of them, near the old mill. Word is they're planning to take the valley tonight, clear out every soul loyal to the Coles or anyone who stands in their way." Mary's breath caught. "He's going to burn the town?" "Not the town," Rourke said quietly. "Just the people." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we meet them head on." The sheriff gave a weary sigh. "You don't win against numbers like that, Cole. Not with one gun and a good cause." "Then we'll find another way," Ethan said. "We'll make them come where we want them." Rourke studied him for a moment. "You've got something in mind." Ethan walked to the window, staring toward the hills. The old canyon trail, narrow, rocky. They can't ride more than 2 across. If we can draw them in there, we can even the odds. Rourke frowned. "You're talking about a trap." "I'm talking about survival," Ethan said. "We can use the land, collapse part of the ridge, block their exit, cut them off before they reach the valley." Mary stepped forward. "That's suicide." "Maybe," Ethan said, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "But if we don't stop them, there won't be a valley left to save." Rourke's silence stretched for a long moment before he finally said, "I'll get what men I can trust. Not many, but enough to make noise." Ethan nodded. "We ride by nightfall." The sky turned a bruised gray as dusk bled into night. In the distance, the glow of lanterns flickered where Briggs's men were gathering, shadows moving like a swarm across the lower valley. Ethan and Rourke crouched by the ridge, their breaths fogging in the cold. A handful of townsmen stood behind them, rifles ready but faces pale with fear. Ethan scanned the canyon below. "You sure they'll take the bait?" Rourke nodded. "Briggs doesn't like being challenged. You burned one of his wagons, shot 2 of his riders. He'll come for you himself." "Good," Ethan muttered. "That's exactly what I want." They moved quickly, planting oil barrels along the narrow trail and stringing fuse lines through the rocks. The plan was simple: lure Briggs's riders into the canyon, light the oil, and collapse the ridge before they could escape. It would be brutal, but it would end the war. As they worked, Mary appeared behind them, bundled in a heavy coat. Ethan turned, startled. "What are you doing here?" "I told you, you don't fight this alone," she said. "If you fall, who'll stop them from coming for the rest of us?" He shook his head. "This isn't your fight." "Then whose is it?" she asked quietly. "This valley is as much mine as yours." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rourke cleared his throat. "She's right, Cole. You can't keep the world safe by standing between it and every bullet." Ethan looked from Rourke to Mary, then exhaled slowly. "Fine. But you stay behind the ridge. No heroics." Mary gave a small smile. "That's your department." Hours later, the sound of horses thundered in the dark. The canyon walls echoed with the shouts of men and the clatter of steel. Briggs rode at the front, his red scarf whipping like a flag of defiance. "Cole," his voice roared through the night. "You think you can hide behind rocks? You burned my men. I'll burn your whole damn valley." Ethan's heart pounded. He glanced at Rourke. "Wait for my signal." The riders poured into the narrow pass, torches held high. Ethan could see the firelight glinting off their rifles, could hear the anger in their voices. He waited until the last of them entered the canyon, then struck the match. The fuse hissed, the spark racing down the line. The oil ignited in a wall of flame, blinding the first wave of riders. Horses screamed and reared, chaos breaking loose. Ethan shouted, "Now!" Rourke's men fired into the canyon walls, hitting the weak rock face. The ground shuddered, and a thunderous crack split the night as the ridge collapsed. Dust and fire swallowed everything below. The explosion echoed through the valley, rolling like distant thunder. When the smoke cleared, silence fell, broken only by the hiss of dying flames. Ethan stood motionless, staring into the canyon. The fire's glow flickered across his face. "It's over," he said quietly. Rourke lowered his rifle. "Maybe." Mary stepped closer, her eyes searching the shadows below. "You're sure he's gone?" Ethan didn't answer. Deep in the canyon, through the smoke and ruin, a single figure moved, slow, deliberate. Briggs, bloodied but alive, dragging himself from the wreckage. Rourke saw him too. "You should end it," he said. Ethan raised his gun but hesitated. Mary's words echoed in his mind. "Don't lose yourself." His hand trembled. Then, instead of firing, he holstered the revolver. "No," he said. "Let the law finish what fire couldn't." Rourke nodded slowly, relief flickering in his eyes. "I'll take him in." But as they turned to leave, a distant rumble rolled through the canyon again. Briggs's men, those who'd survived, were regrouping beyond the ridge. Ethan looked toward the horizon, where a new light burned through the smoke. It's not over, he said softly. Not yet. Mary stepped beside him, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Then we'll finish it together. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the scent of ash and victory, thin, fragile, and fleeting. And as the flames below began to die, the real war for Redemption Valley had only just begun. Dawn broke gray and brittle over Redemption Valley, the kind of morning that carried no warmth, only the echo of what the night had taken. The canyon below still smoldered, a slow breath of ash and ruin rising into the pale sky. Ethan stood at the edge of the ridge, his coat torn and singed, his eyes hollow but sharp. The wind stung his face, bringing with it the faint scent of gunpowder and burned oil. Sheriff Rourke was beside him, his hat in his hands. We buried 7 of them at first light, he said quietly. The rest, well, they're down there with the rocks. Ethan nodded but said nothing. He could still see Briggs crawling out from the fire the night before, still alive, still dangerous. That image haunted him like a brand that wouldn't fade. Rourke sighed. We've sent men to fetch a wagon. Briggs is hurt bad, but he's breathing. I'll take him to the jail myself. Ethan finally spoke. He'll talk? Oh, he'll talk, Rourke said, though his tone held little conviction. A man like him always thinks he's smarter than the rope might even tell me who else was in on it. Ethan looked out over the valley. And if he doesn't? The sheriff's gaze hardened. Then maybe justice will come another way. Mary climbed the ridge slowly, her skirts brushing against the frost. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But there was relief too, quiet and fragile. She paused beside Ethan, laying a hand on his sleeve. You're hurt. He glanced at the bandage on his arm, blood seeping through. Just a scratch. You've said that 3 times this week, she said softly. He gave a faint smile. Guess I'm running out of truth. Her eyes lingered on him. You didn't kill Briggs. No. You wanted to. Yes. She nodded, her hand tightening slightly. That's what makes the difference, Ethan. He looked at her, but before he could answer, Rourke called out, Cole, over here. They crossed the ridge where the sheriff stood near a cluster of rocks. A man lay half-buried beneath the debris, alive, but barely. Briggs. His face was swollen and blackened from smoke, his red scarf torn to ribbons. When he saw Ethan, a twisted smile crept across his cracked lips. Cowboy, Briggs rasped. You didn't finish the job. Ethan crouched down. You talk now, Briggs. You tell the sheriff who helped you burn my ranch. Briggs coughed, a wet sound, and spat blood into the dirt. You really think I was the one pulling the strings? You think I burned your house for land? Rourke frowned. Then who did? Briggs's eyes flicked up, glinting with cruel amusement. Ask your fine friends in town. Ask who signed the contracts the day after the fire. Ask the man with a silver pen and clean hands. What contracts? Ethan demanded. Briggs chuckled weakly. The coal land's already gone, boy. Sold before the ashes cooled. Sheriff's office approved it. Funny how quick the papers moved, huh? Rourke's face went still. That's a lie. Briggs's laugh turned into a cough that didn't stop. His chest rattled once, twice, and then went still. Ethan rose slowly. He's dead. Rourke stared down at the body, jaw tight. And he died spitting poison. Mary stepped closer, her eyes darting between them. What did he mean? The papers. Ethan looked at the sheriff. Yeah, what did he mean? Rourke met his gaze for a long, hard moment. You think I'd take part in that? I think someone did, Ethan said evenly. Careful what you're saying, Rourke warned. You're angry, and I don't blame you. But don't start tearing down the only law left standing." Ethan turned away, staring out across the valley again. The snow was melting where the fires had burned hottest, revealing the black scars beneath. Then maybe the law needs new hands. They returned to town by afternoon. Word of the canyon fight had spread faster than the smoke. The townsfolk gathered in clusters near the general store and along the street, whispering as Ethan passed. Some nodded to him with quiet respect. Others looked away, uneasy. At the jail, Rourke oversaw the prisoners, Briggs's surviving men, shackled and filthy. The sheriff's deputy, young and nervous, handed him a folded piece of paper. "This came from the land office, sir." Rourke unfolded it, and his face changed. Ethan saw the color drain from his cheeks. "What is it?" he asked. The sheriff hesitated. "It's a deed, transferring ownership of the coal property to a company in Denver." Mary frowned. "How could that happen? The ranch burned down." Ethan took the paper from Rourke's hand and read the fine print. His name was there. Ethan Cole, written in perfect cursive. But the signature wasn't his. "It's forged," he said. Rourke's jaw clenched. Then someone in the county office made sure it looked real. Ethan folded the deed and stuffed it into his coat. "I'll find who did it." "Don't do anything stupid," Rourke warned. "You've got enemies now, men with money and lawyers instead of guns. You can't fight them the same way." Ethan gave him a grim smile. "I can learn." That evening, the saloon buzzed with talk. The piano played softly, drowned beneath the low hum of voices. Ethan walked in through the back door, the forged deed in his pocket. He scanned the room until he found the man he was looking for, Samuel Tate, a portly banker with slicked hair and a diamond pin that caught the light. He was laughing with two merchants near the bar. Ethan approached quietly. "Mr. Tate." The banker turned, his smile faltering. "Ah, Mr. Cole. I heard about your misfortune. Terrible business, that fire." Ethan laid the deed on the table. "You signed this?" Tate's eyes flickered. Well, yes, the papers were filed last week. Routine transfer. The property was abandoned and—" "It wasn't abandoned," Ethan said, voice low and sharp. "You knew it was arson." Tate tried to laugh it off. "Now, Mr. Cole, emotions are high." Ethan's hand slammed the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Who paid you?" The banker went pale. "You're making dangerous accusations." "Not half as dangerous as the truth," Ethan growled. The saloon had gone quiet. Men stared, waiting. Tate swallowed hard, glancing toward the door where one of his associates had slipped out a moment earlier. "You don't know who you're up against, Cole," he said. "These aren't outlaws. They're businessmen. They'll crush you and everyone who helps you." Ethan leaned closer, his voice cold. "Then I guess they'll have to learn what happens when you steal from a man who's already lost everything." He turned and walked out, leaving the banker shaking. Outside, Mary was waiting near the hitching post. "You got your proof?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "But I've got their names now." Her brow furrowed. "And what will you do?" Ethan looked back toward the saloon, where the lamplight flickered against the frosted windows. "What I should have done from the start," he said. "Burn their lies in daylight." Mary's eyes softened, though her voice trembled. "Be careful. They don't fight fair." He smiled faintly. "Neither do I anymore." The wind carried their breath away into the night. Somewhere down the street, a piano resumed playing, slow, haunting. Tomorrow, Ethan would go to the courthouse, where the men in suits thought themselves untouchable, and by the time the sun set again, Redemption Valley would know that the fire wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The morning sun over Redemption Valley had a brittle shine, the kind that made every breath of wind feel colder than it should. The town seemed quieter than usual, as if it too sensed the tension simmering beneath the frost. Ethan Cole stood outside the courthouse, his coat dusted with snow, his jaw set in his pocket. The forged deed felt heavier than iron. Mary had tried to stop him from coming. "You're walking into their den," she'd said that morning. "They own the walls, the words, the men sitting behind the desk." "I'm not asking for fairness," Ethan had told her. "Just truth." Now, as he pushed open the courthouse doors, the echo of his boots filled the hall like a warning inside. A group of men in tailored coats waited near the judge's bench, Samuel Tate among them, pale and sweating. 2 others stood beside him, strangers from the city, their hands soft, but their eyes sharp. They looked up when Ethan entered. "Mr. Cole," Judge Harris said, clearing his throat. "We weren't expecting you." "I figured you wouldn't," Ethan replied, dropping the folded paper onto the desk. "That's my land you signed away." The judge adjusted his spectacles. Those documents were processed through proper channels. "With a forged signature," Ethan said, voice rising. "You can still see the ink's too smooth. Machine written, not hand-signed. You didn't even bother to check." Tate stepped forward nervously. Now, there's no need for accusations." Ethan cut him off. "You and Briggs set the fire. Then you sold what was left to your Denver friends here. You thought no one would dig through the ashes." One of the strangers smiled thinly. "Mr. Cole, these are very serious claims. You have no evidence." Ethan leaned forward, his shadow cutting across the table. "I've got a dead man who named you before he choked on his last breath. That's evidence enough for me." The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order! Mr. Cole, this is not a trial." "No," Ethan said, his voice like iron, "but it's going to be one." For a moment, no one moved. Then the door behind him opened, and Sheriff Rourke walked in, his badge glinting. He looked at Ethan, then at the men gathered before the bench. "He's telling the truth," the sheriff said. "We found ledgers in Briggs's cabin, lists of payments made to Tate's bank, dates matching every fire and sale in the valley for the past 2 years. The color drained from Tate's face. "That's impossible," he stammered. Rourke dropped the ledger on the table. "Looks pretty damn possible to me." The judge looked from one man to the next, his authority melting under the weight of silence. This needs investigation." "It'll get one," Rourke said, "but not by your office. I've already sent word to the state marshal." Ethan exhaled slowly. For the first time in months, he felt something like release. Thin, fragile, but real. Tate turned to him, desperation clawing at his voice. "You don't understand. It was business, Cole. Just business." Ethan stepped closer. "That fire wasn't business. It was my home." Tate backed away, tripping over the step behind him. The city men said nothing, their expressions cold and calculating. Ethan almost pitied them, men who thought profit could bury conscience. Almost, the sheriff took Tate by the arm. "You'll have plenty of time to explain it to a jury." As they led him away, the judge muttered something about legal proceedings, but Ethan barely heard. The sound of the cuffs snapping shut was louder than any gavel. Outside, Mary was waiting on the courthouse steps. The sunlight caught in her hair, soft against the cold air. When she saw Ethan, she didn't speak. She just searched his face for what this victory had cost him. "It's over," he said quietly. Her eyes glistened. Is it? He looked out toward the valley, where smoke still rose faintly from the burned ridge. Not yet, he admitted, but it will be soon. She nodded. Then come home. He smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed distant. After one more thing. What thing? Ethan turned toward the ridge. Briggs might be dead, but his fire isn't. There are still men out there who'll come looking to finish what he started. Mary reached for his hand. And if they do? He squeezed her fingers gently. Then they'll find I'm still standing. They walked together down the courthouse steps, the snow crunching softly beneath their boots. The townsfolk were already gathering, whispering the news of Tate's arrest, of the law finally touching those who thought they were untouchable. But Ethan knew better than to believe in peace so quickly. The valley had been saved for now, but the cost was written in every scar, every grave, every memory still smelling faintly of smoke. And somewhere beyond the hills, new riders would be watching. Tomorrow, he would be ready for them. The snow had begun to melt, leaving the earth soft and dark beneath the sunlight. Redemption Valley was waking again. Slowly, like a wounded thing learning to breathe, the air smelled of wet pine and thawed soil instead of smoke. For the first time in months, the wind carried no fear. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of what had once been his family's ranch. The land stretched out before him, blackened in some places, green in others where grass had begun to return. He could still see the ghosts of the old house, the porch where his mother used to hum, the barn where his father taught him to ride. The memories no longer hurt. They simply were, like the scars on his hands. Mary walked toward him, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. Her cheeks were touched by color again, and though her eyes carried the fatigue of all they'd endured, there was peace there too. It's coming back, she said quietly, nodding toward the field. The land always does. Ethan gave a small smile. It's stubborn that way. She stood beside him, watching the horizon. What will you do now? He thought for a long moment before answering. Rebuild. Not just the ranch, the town, the trust. Rourke's been talking about starting a council, giving folks a voice in what happens next. Maybe redemption finally lives up to its name. Mary's lips curved into a soft smile. You think they'll forgive what happened? Ethan shook his head. Forgiveness isn't the point. It's remembering what comes after. The sound of hoofbeats broke the quiet. Sheriff Rourke rode up the trail, tipping his hat as he approached. You two look like you've seen a ghost. Just the past, Ethan said. Well, Rourke replied, swinging down from his horse. Seems the future's got a few surprises left. The state marshal finished the inquiry. Tate and the others, those city men, confessed. Looks like they'll be spending a long time behind bars. Ethan nodded slowly. And the valley? Free again, Rourke said. No more claims, no more forged papers. The land's yours. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. The words hung in the air like a bell tone, pure, unreal. He turned to Mary. You hear that? It's ours again. She smiled through tears she hadn't meant to shed. You fought for it, Ethan. You earned it. Rourke chuckled. You both did. Folks in town are already saying the widow and the cowboy saved redemption. Ethan looked down, embarrassed. Never thought I'd be anybody's story. Maybe not, Rourke said. But you're a damn good ending to one. He put his hat back on and mounted his horse. Take care of yourselves. The valley's in better hands now than it's been in years. As the sheriff rode away, silence returned. a quiet not of emptiness, but of healing. Mary reached out, her hand brushing his arm. He's right, you know. You gave people hope again. Ethan looked out over the field where new shoots of grass swayed in the wind. Hope's a dangerous thing, he said softly. So is love, she replied. He turned to her, meeting her eyes. There was no more pretense between them, no more fear of what the valley might take next. Then maybe I've had enough danger to last a lifetime. She smiled. Then stay. Build something that lasts. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the spot where his parents' graves lay under a simple wooden cross. I will. They stood there for a while, side by side, as sunlight spilled over the hills and the snow began to recede. The sound of running water came from the creek nearby, the same creek that had once reflected the fire's glow. Now it shimmered with light, clean and clear. Ethan took off his hat and held it to his chest. For them, he murmured, for everyone who didn't make it. Mary slipped her hand into his, and for those who did. He squeezed her hand gently, grounding himself in the moment, in the warmth of her touch. Redemption, he said, almost to himself. Guess the name fits after all. She smiled. It always did. We just had to earn it. The wind carried their laughter across the open field, the valley, scarred but alive, stretched endlessly ahead, a promise instead of a wound. As the sun rose higher, Ethan turned toward the cottage on the ridge. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, the sign of life continuing. He glanced back one last time at the land that had nearly broken him, and then, with Mary beside him, he walked home. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.